nation stands on a knife's edge. The ugliness of racism and something about our self-understanding has fundamentally been shaken. This will demand of us a new American story and robust policies to repair what we have done. And we will have to decide once and for all whether or not we will truly be a multiracial democracy, that each element is important to any effort toward beginning again.
My name is Dan BARKHUFF. I'm a 2001 United States Naval Academy graduate. I'm an ex-Navy SEAL, currently an emergency room physician, and the founder of Veterans for Responsible Leadership. Months ago, Donald Trump learned that the Russians were paying bounties for dead American soldiers in Afghanistan. He chose to do nothing about it. Any commander-in-chief with a spine would be stomping the living out of some Russians right now, diplomatically, economically, or, if necessary, with the sort of asymmetric warfare they're using to send our kids home in body bags. Mr. Trump, you're either a coward who can't stand up to an ex-KGB goon, or you're complicit. Which is it?
Wow. In a moment, I'll be speaking with Dr. Dan BARKHUFF about that bombshell New York Times report published over a week ago. Donald Trump denies that he had any advanced knowledge of the alleged bounties. But as the ad for the Lincoln Project underscores, Trump still hasn't told the American public or the world how this administration plans to punish Russia. Instead, he and the White House have reacted the way they normally do about these types of stories, from denying ever being told to calling it a hoax. Here's a doozy from the White House press secretary.
I would re-ask the question of whether it was in his material, but ask you maybe to defend why the president isn't necessarily reading his PDB when there are these types of issues that could arise.
The president does read, and he also consumes intelligence verbally. This president, I'll tell you, is the most informed person on planet Earth when it comes to the threats that we face.
Somehow, a briefing of this magnitude got past the most informed person on planet Earth. Officials tell the New York Times Trump got a written briefing back in February on possible Russian bounties. Meanwhile, NBC News reports that the White House learned of Russian bounty intelligence in early 2019. Joining me now, Rukmini Callimachi, MSNBC contributor and foreign correspondent for the New York Times, who has been covering this story. Dr. Dan BARKHUFF, who you just saw in that commercial, founder of Veterans for Responsible Leadership, and my friend Nayyera Haq, former State Department senior advisor and former White House senior director in the Obama administration. Thank you guys for being here. Dr. BARKHUFF, I actually want to start with you. First of all, that ad is extraordinarily powerful. The closing gave me goosebumps. Listen, I think for a lot of people, this, if nothing else, is the line to cross when you are literally appearing to be complacent with a foreign adversary at best, or complicit, as you suggest in the ad, at worst. Tell me what it took to make you step out. Why speak out at this point? How did you get involved in the Lincoln Project? And how are you feeling about the commander-in-chief commanding our military forces right now?
Thanks, Joy. Happy to be here. So, there's a couple things to unpack there, but convincing me to speak out. I founded Veterans for Responsible Leadership in what seems like ancient history now. Back in 2017 with the Michael Flynn scandal. We started as a small Facebook group and grew to something that has a couple thousand members at this point. The Russian bounty story is just such a betrayal from on multiple levels. He clearly. And I can't speculate as to what his motives are. Aside from, I think the guy's frankly a coward and cannot stand up to Vladimir Putin. And whether you're a liberal or a conservative, standing up to someone who's putting cash bounties out for dead American soldiers, that's kind of implied in the task of being the president of the United States.
So I'm curious, before I move on to my other guest, how are your fellow men in uniform and men and women in uniform reacting to this? Because we've seen he enjoyed support from the military, quite frankly. So people who you talk to, how do they feel about this president?
Sure. So, Trump did enjoy a great deal of support initially. You know, I think folks in the military, and I want to preface this, Joy, by saying I certainly do not speak for everyone in the military, and people are entitled to make up their own mind. I've seen more and more veterans and active duty service members reach out to me telling me that this is just ridiculous. I mean, there is no job in the military, save perhaps commander-in-chief, that you could ever entrust Donald Trump with. He couldn't lead a fire team. He couldn't be a PFC and make it through boot camp. He certainly couldn't be a battalion commander in an Army infantry battalion. You know, there is no job that I would entrust this man with when it comes to folks on active duty. He's clearly demonstrated he is out for himself. He is not a team player. And, you know, folks in the military are starting to pick up on that. You know, he's always going to have his supporters, and that's fine. We're all citizens of this democracy, and people can have their own point of view. But more and more folks are saying this has just gone on long enough.
Rick Meany, I want to turn to you now. I was reading your reporting in the New York Times this week about that CIA memo. Tell us the latest in your reporting on where this entire issue stands in the intel community and what the potential fallout may be.
Mm-hmm. So at this point, we know that the president received at least 2 different intelligence products indicating that this bounty was being paid by Russia to kill Americans in Afghanistan. There was the presidential daily briefing in February. Then in May, there was something called The Wire. This is a CIA product that we believe he also saw. Most recently, in the last couple of days, there's been yet another memo from the intelligence community. This one affirms what we already know, which is the theory that Russia paid this money to these intermediaries of the Taliban. But what's interesting about this product is that it appears to put a lot of focus on the gaps in the intelligence, on the things that may not be true. And as my colleagues reported, it seems that this new memo, which essentially came out after the New York Times broke the story, is trying to maybe put cold water on it and make it look like the intelligence is not as solid as we believe it is.
Unbelievable. So, Nayara, I want to turn to you. You and I have shared a screen or two in our past. And I remember early on, Nayara, you talked about how it looked on the world stage for Donald Trump to essentially surround himself with his family. And you said that was something that was very comparable to dictators across the country. I'm particularly curious your perspective on what this current situation with Russia and the Taliban, what signal that sends to leaders, other leaders on the global stage.
I appreciate, Tiffany, that you're focusing on Donald Trump's behavior and not just Russia, because I think that can be a red herring and a distraction at this moment. Russia's always been an adversary, and sometimes they've even been a partner in different parts of Afghanistan. This goes back to the early 1980s. So it's a complex relationship that the commander-in-chief, who right now is President Trump, needs to understand. Now, the defense from the White House early on was, well, he didn't read his briefing, and now it is, well, he's the most informed person. It ultimately is focusing on the capabilities of our president to even absorb basic information to do his job. I mean, that is the conversation that the White House is trying to project to the rest of the world, not how are we going to hold Russia accountable, how are we going to do any countermeasures. The allies were not informed. At some point, the British may have been at risk as well. So we are alienating allies right now. And we are going along with Russia and allowing them to have a space almost entirely to themselves with zero reaction from the United States. So this is, once again, a concept of America first that really is America alone. And I would even go so far as to say right now, America looking stupid.
Wow. So because, Nayara, that you were involved in foreign policy during the Obama administration, I find fascinating about this story that some of the revelations that came out of John Bolton's book. And he said that he has enough scars from trying to bring up Russia to Donald Trump, who seems very resistant to even having a conversation or engaging about anything negative about Putin. So what is the recourse, quite honestly, for the intel community or for people who are trying to keep this president informed when he's resistant to facts and information, and he doesn't appear to read, according to some reports, his daily intel briefing? How essentially do we lead on the global stage around issues like this, particularly when it's costing American lives?
This is where it gets, you see the commonality between what's going on domestically and what's going on overseas, right? We have a president who, for whatever reason, will always double down on white supremacy and support of people who for example, want to keep Confederate statues up. The same thing when it comes to overseas. He has picked his friends, we consider now allies of the United States, and those friends are autocrats and dictators, right? It's the Saudis and the Russians. And he will never hear anything that suggests that they are not working in friendship with him, because they're happy to pick up the phone and butter him up. Whereas our allies in Europe and elsewhere will actually speak the truth and try to work with the reality of what we're dealing with in the global stage. Unfortunately, this means that our men and women on the ground, either in the intel community, diplomats, or in the military, have to now execute things at a local level and make what little gains they can, independent of a larger, broader strategy. Let's not forget, we have been in Afghanistan for more than 20 years now. And that is a conversation that this president has not had with the American public of what is the point, what are we there for, and what is in Americans' national security interest. And unfortunately, I don't see this president capable of having that broader strategic conversation with the American public or with the rest of the world.
All right, well, it's Independence Day. I want to give Dr. BARKHUFF the last word. I imagine that our men and women in uniform may not have the best morale right now. So if you could deliver some words of encouragement, what would you say to your fellow people in uniform on this day, given what's happened with these revelations coming from the New York Times? Dr. BARKHUFF, I'll give it to you.
Sure. So I'd slightly disagree with that characterization, although I think it's from a good place. But the men and women in uniform today are professionals. I don't expect that their morale is affected whatsoever in their ability to do their job. You know, I was proud to serve alongside them. They're complete professionals. They will get the job done. They will keep us safe. And I thank anyone in uniform listening for keeping me and my family safe.
Fair enough. I appreciate that. And thank you for your service, and thank you all for joining me. Thank you, Rukmini Callimachi, Dr. Dan BARKHUFF, and Nayyera Haq.